Okay, he's already got me set up. How do we connect covenantally? Now, I hadn't done this one before, but this is my picture of connecting covenantally. That we take the red thread of the covenant and we connect together because we're all linked together. And so, I was just excited that I was able to get a gold chain to do that. So we're going to look at how we connect together. We're going to look at Ruth again in each one of these. And before we do, let me open us in prayer again. Lord, what a great day this has been. It's been a thrill for me just to renew relationships with friends that I've known for a long time and to meet new friends, and thank you for just the connections that took place at the tables during our meal. So, Father, we just ask now that you will go with us as we look at the different roles that women have in the church and in the home, and how we can use these roles to bring glory to you. We give these things to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so, excuse me, we're going to look at Ruth. We're going to look at these roles of women. We're all daughters, sisters, some are physical sisters, but neighbors, wife, mother, pilgrim. We're going to look at these roles. So the first one we're going to look at is the daughter. So if you'll turn to Ruth 2, we're going to look at 1 through 13. So we're going to finish the book of Ruth this afternoon. We want to see what it means to be a spiritual daughter. Now, Ruth's decision not to return to her mother's home was costly to her. She had to choose between her biological mother and all that she represented, and all her spiritual mother represented to her as well. In Moab, she lived in her world worshiping other gods, and yet Naomi was from a covenant family. So to go with Naomi would mean rejection of her family and the idols in her homeland to worship the true God. In Matthew 10:37-39, it says, "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." I said I was going to bring in some personal things that happened yesterday and today. I got an email from one of my friends who's a missionary in Papua New Guinea this morning. She's been through some health issues. She's a single woman who's been over there for 20 years as a teacher. And I remember when she went out, and her parents did not want her to go. And so today in this letter from her, she said, she had these verses, because she said her mother said, "How dare you leave us in our old age?" So it applies today the same as it did back then. In Ruth 1:16 and 17, this was where Ruth chose to follow Naomi, her mother-in-law, who was also then her spiritual mother. She said, "Do not urge me to leave you or return from following you, for where you go I will go, and where you lodge I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God, and where you die I will die, and there will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." They had a Titus 2 relationship, and this relationship has a legacy of gratitude. The evangelistic outreach had already taken place in Moab, and the nurturing began as they came back to Bethlehem. In 19 through 22, it says, "So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem, and when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, 'Is this Naomi?' She said to them, 'Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?' So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. Naomi taught Ruth the law of providing for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, as seen in Deuteronomy 24:19 through 22. When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner, for the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go back over them again. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not strip it afterwards. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command you to do this. So they're back in Bethlehem, and where did Ruth go? If we turn to chapter 2, 1 through 13. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of the grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come upon the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." So he was a covenant man as well. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers." So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not glean in another field, or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn?" Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I'm a foreigner?" But he answered her and said, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Then she said, "I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants." So as Ruth followed Naomi's instruction in her life, she began maturing into the woman God had intended for her to become. I am personally a spiritual daughter to several women in my life. The first one is my own mother, who taught me about Jesus from infancy. And she was always my cheerleader growing up. She was one of my GA leaders and YWA leaders. She taught me this verse from real young elementary age, Philippians 4:13. "I can do all things through him who strengthens me." The second was her mother, my grandmother, whom we called Bond. That was her last name, and it was Meemaw Bond, and my brother came along and we dropped it to Bond. So everybody in Rossville and everybody in our family called her Bond. She and my grandfather, we lived next door to them too, by the way. And they had the biggest impact on my life besides my parents. My grandfather would study his Bible on Saturday nights to prepare for his Sunday school classes. She would have her devotional every morning at her kitchen table. Just great, faithful people of God. She was always there for me as well. Her faith was so strong, and I can remember the verse that she always quoted was 2 Timothy 1:12. "But I'm not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard that until that day what has been entrusted to me." So I have the two, my mother and my grandmother, who are my physical spiritual mothers as well as the physical. But when I started teaching in high school, there was a lady there, Harriet Bond, who invited me to come to First Pres. She and I had prayed together. I was there for 10 years as a teacher, and we prayed together every week with a few other Christian teachers. We led a Christian fellowship group after school. I hate it that Sarah Ann's not here, because Carolyn Scott Lonis was one of my other spiritual mothers. She was my circle leader when my children were real little. We had a circle that used one of Susan Hunt's books, Spiritual Mothering. She and I became Bible study leaders together. Actually, I was the leader and she was my assistant, and I thought, this is crazy. It should be the other way around with her. But she had been Preswick president years before that. She was a WIC advisor to the board at Covenant, and she was also a WASC member for our region. So I followed in her footsteps. What a blessing. She loved missions, and she and Jack loved working in London with World Harvest Mission. I mentioned that Lauren and I had been over there, and we were there. They would go over and stay 3 or 4 months at a time and come back home. She loved that ministry. Winnie Rose and Betty Seep were presidents of our WIC when I was treasurer, and that was when Catherine was a baby. She's 29 now. They were the women who mentored me in the leadership of the women at our church. And Vivian McKinnon was president when I was her vice president, 97, 98, I think, is when I was president. So she became my spiritual mother. She'd actually been Catherine's Sunday school teacher in the kindergarten department. She'd been our church secretary when I first came there as singles. And then she and I became very, very close that year that I was her vice president. So close that when my mother ended up in an assisted living and then onto a nursing home and had dementia, Vivian really became my second mother. And her husband, Jack, was very close to Lauren, and they were our spiritual parents. They were really our adopted parents. And Jack died a couple of years ago, and I was able to speak at his funeral of the impact that he and Vivian had on Lauren and me. Some of y'all know Martha Lovelady, who was at Lookout Mountain Pres. She's Martha Hanson now. She married a few years ago. But she was there for me. She's the one that got me involved at Preswick. She's the one that got me involved in leadership in Atlanta. She's really helped me with covenant theology. She started the Preswick again as the one that asked me to come on Preswick Council. She was a WIC advisor to the board at Covenant, as well as our regional WASC member. So again, I'm privileged to follow her and Carolyn in those roles. So Susan Hunt, who's written all these books that I have up here if you want to come see them, and Jane Petit. Susan was the women's ministry coordinator, then Jane, and now we have a new one I'll talk about in a little bit. But they gave me that foundation of covenant theology, and I'm so grateful. So my question is, are you a spiritual daughter to someone? 2 Timothy 2:2 says, "What you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men or women who will be able to teach others also." So do you have a Paul or a Paulette in your life? Someone who's really invested in you? The next one we're going to look at is sister. Now you all may have sisters. I don't have a sister. I have a brother. But my only girl cousin on my dad's side of the family is just a year older than I am. Her birthday was this past week, and we send each other sister cards. We've done it for, I can't even remember when, I guess all our lives. We were very, very close. In Mark 3:35 it says, "For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother." We are sisters to all who have been adopted by God into his family. I mentioned before our adoption determines our eternal family. And he sovereignly elects us, his children, from every tribe, tongue, nation, and socioeconomic group. It's our adoption that separates us. Our mother may or may not be our sister in Christ. A brother or a sister may or not be a brother or sister in Christ. It's the Hesed love, that steadfast love of the Lord, that's to govern our relationships in our Christian community. Galatians 5:13 says that through love serve one another. 1 Thessalonians 5:11, "Therefore encourage one another and build one another up, just as you are doing." Sisters serve one another in love and encourage each other. And their legacy is unity. And I love this verse in Psalm 133:1, "Behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers or sisters dwell in unity." Now Ruth and Naomi were unlikely sisters. In fact, their relationship's one of the most maligned in womanhood, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Ruth did the unexpected. She did the Hesed love. She clung to Naomi. And they were both racially, generationally, and culturally different, but they were spiritual sisters. And then they became spiritual mother and daughter. But their sisterhood was a testimony to the faith in the community. And I've got the verses, Ruth 1:19, "So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem, and when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, 'Is this Naomi?'" So they saw that spiritual sisterhood when they came back to Bethlehem. And then Boaz in 2:11 said, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. How you left your mother and your father in your native land and came to the people that you did not know. So their sisterhood was evident around that community. And then he said in 3:11, I love this verse, and now my daughter, do not fear. I will do all that you ask, for all the fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And in another version, I like it better. It says, you're a woman of excellence. So the people heard about her relationship to the Lord and Naomi. Now I have another spiritual mother who's written several books, one of which is called Becoming a Woman of Excellence. Y'all may have heard of Cynthia Hield. The Navigators we've been involved with because of our Sunday school teacher being a Navigator staff when we were single. And so we'd supported them for years. And in the summer or the spring of 1989, I was sent this book, I guess just because we had supported them, and so my Bible study at church was finishing, but my little group wanted to do a summer study. And this had come in the mail, and I said, would y'all like to do this study? And they said yes, so we did. We got Child Evangelism Fellowship people to come. We went to a house, and they came and took care of our children, did a little Good News Club with them while we did our Bible study. My husband had just been transferred to Watts Bar from downtown. Watts Bar is 53 miles one way from our house. And I thought, well, he's only going to be there about 6 or 8 months. He stayed there 18 years, driving back and forth every day. But this book got me through that summer with that study with those women. And Cynthia, it impressed me so much that I wrote her a letter. She lives in Arizona with the Navigators. And I said, how much did it impact me? I said, if you're ever in Chattanooga, I want to meet you and everything. So she was here a few years later for a conference at First Baptist downtown, and a lady knew that I wanted to meet her and invited me to come, and I met her. Well, I was coming in as president the next couple of years, and I really wanted her to come and be our retreat speaker. And when I met her that day, it was going to be like a year and a half or so later before she would speak. She said, I'm booked up. And I said, okay, I'm sorry. I really wanted her to. But so my father-in-law passed away suddenly in November. And I really grieved a lot. My husband's mother had died before we were married. I never knew her, so I can't relate to the mother-in-law. He had a stepmother that I, loved very much, but I never knew his mother. And when his dad died unexpectedly, it just really sent me for a loop. My dad had already died several years before. And Cynthia called me like the day after New Year's, and she said, and this was going to be a whole another year and a half later, I think. She said, if you still want me to come, I think I can. And she came and did a retreat for us, and now she's been back and spoken to us another time. I have nearly every one of her books I've gone through. They're fabulous. And I'm doing this with the girls at Covenant College this semester. They picked what they wanted. And Cynthia just had surgery about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So if y'all know of her, please pray that she heals quickly from that surgery. When I think about spiritual sisters that I've had over the years, I've got 2 that really stand out to me. One is a friend whose mother and my mother went to high school together here in Chattanooga. Her name is Sandy also. We knew each other in college. We were in different sororities, but we really got to know each other when we got involved at the high school ministry level. She was teaching at GPS and I was teaching at City, and we got involved with Campus Crusades high school ministry. We ended up being roommates for a few years. We both have the strong Baptist roots, but we're very much now reformed in our thinking. She's the one that told me, let's be glad we're learning it now. We have great unity in the Lord. I was reading my text and things a few minutes ago, so she just texted me about praying for me today. My other sister is at our church. Brenda, too, has a Baptist background. I guess all these Baptists make good Presbyterians. She and I led a Bible study together for many years at the church. We've known our children about the same age. We've known each other since they were preschool age. We have prayed them all the way through everything they've gone through. She went to leadership training with me a few years ago, right before they asked her to be president of our women at the church. She caught the vision of Titus II ministry. leading covenant from a covenant theology perspective. She's been one of the spiritual mothers in one of the groups, for our Titus II groups. But what was really neat was that she and I led this study, Becoming a Woman, the Legacy of Biblical Womanhood, that Susan wrote about 10 years ago or so. We did this study in 2005 with women from our church in the summer, after General Assembly had been here in that summer. And we had great response from it. This is the book that I'm really using the basis of what I'm teaching you today, because she takes the book of Ruth and walks through these people that we are the roles for. So I highly recommend this book. Brenda and I love each other with that Hesed love. Sandy and I love each other that way. I've got a lot of other sisters in Christ, don't get me wrong, but those two, when I think about the sister and the unity in the faith, they're the ones that stand out to me. Do you have those kind of sisters? I'm sure y'all do here. You all love each other. But the unity that you have is with the Lord. They'll pray for you, they encourage you. They're right there with you when you go through the hard times as well as the good times. Okay, so the next one is the neighbor. The legacy for neighbor is mercy. So we want to talk about mercy ministry a little bit here. We're to minister to those outside of our covenant family too. Naomi was a neighbor to Orpah. I knew I was going to do that. I practiced it. And Ruth. Ruth became a sister and a spiritual daughter, but Orpah stayed the neighbor. So if we look at Ruth 1, 7 through 10, and 14 and 15 again, we see that Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go and return each of you to your mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you," and so on. And so Orpah kissed her mother-in-law and went back. So she was the neighbor where Ruth became the sister and the daughter to Naomi. We can have nice relationships with neighbors, but unless they have that personal relationship with Christ, they are not daughters or sisters of the covenant. They're not kingdom daughters. And church membership does not equal salvation. And we're also to love our enemies and do them good. And we're to show mercy to women. We talked about that a little bit this morning in being a neighbor. Every relationship was ordained by God and counts for eternity. And as His child, we have close relationships with our brothers and sisters. But we're to be good neighbors to those that are outside our covenant community. We're to love the Lord our God and our neighbor as ourselves. This is the royal law. But we can only love because He first loved us. In 1 John and 1 Corinthians 13, we find out what love is. I just mentioned that our weekly Bible study just finished 1 John. We did a Tim Keller 1 John that finished a week ago. And this week we started Philip Ryken's book, Loving the Way Jesus Loves, that's all on 1 Corinthians 13. So we're really getting a lot about love, and we're being convicted by it to reach out to others in love. My husband was at Watts Bar, I said, for 18 years. He'd probably still be working for TVA if he'd been downtown. But when his time that he could retire came, he went ahead and did it. And the man has been incredible with Mercy Ministry. He began volunteering at the Salvation Army with men from our church. They meet every Friday morning, go down to the Salvation Army, do breakfast and have devotional and help them financially and otherwise there. He has the gift of mercy. I do not. He went to a Hope for the Inner City banquet when he first retired that I wasn't able to go to. And he came home and he said, "I signed a volunteer card over there." And I thought, that's good for you. That's not my thing. I like missions and women's ministry. But my Bible study at that time was studying this book, Don't Waste Your Life by John Piper. This was recommended by one of our assistant pastors, Clay Werner. Clay said to the girl that was leading with me, he said, "Why don't you do one of John Piper's books?" Well, I never heard of it. And I can tell a little story about this because Sue Harris at MTW had asked me to go on a WIC trip to Monterrey, Mexico, take some women down there. So we were meeting over at the Starbucks over here. And I was trying to get into this book for the fall to teach it, and I just could not get past the first chapter. It was existentialism, some things. I thought, I just can't get into this. Maybe I'm not supposed to lead it. And we sat there at Starbucks when I was telling her this, and she said, Sandy, we used to be a basketball coach, she said, this is why I left basketball coaching to come into missions, was because of that book. It changed my life. And as a result of that, it changed my life. Because once I went home that night, I got in the book, I couldn't put it down. So the Lord used her to get me into it. But at some point in the book, he says that mercy and missions go hand in hand, just like those links over there. And that hit me across the face here, because I thought Lauren can go do that mercy ministry all he wants. But for me, I'm doing these other things. And I realized that he called us to do ministry in town as well. We can't be going over across the world to do missions if we're not going to do missions right here in our own town. So, I've gotten off on my thing here. So what he asked me to do, a little sneaky thing, he said, just fix a pot of chili and take it over there to Hope and sit through one of the classes. So I did. I was a good wife, fixed this pot of chili. They had their dinner from 5:30 to 6. They had their classes from 6 to 8. So I go in there, and Lauren was at a meeting at church. He dropped me off at Hope, and there I was, and didn't know anybody. And he came back, but I sat through that class. I couldn't believe it. I mean, there were people there that are felons, people that, attempted murder and all kinds of things. And I fell in love with it. So he and I volunteered over there for 4 years. We watched the 8-week classes. I think we watched between 15 and 20 graduates classes of those over there. Now our church has a ministry at Walker State Prison. I know some of the guys here go to that as well. The women participate in a similar ministry called The Next Door. I don't know if any of your women are involved with that. We have a faith and finance class at our Sunday school for people that walk in off the street. They're told to help. If they really want to get help, they will come and try to get help financially, so that with their budgets and everything, so that they can walk their own financial route. So women help with that because there's women in the class. Lauren is one that sometimes will go down to church for the people that come in off the street. They have to make appointments now, so they know which day of the week people are going to be there for that. And sometimes I've gone with him because they like for women to be there when the women come in. It's just been amazing to watch. He does a much better job with it than I, because like I said, I don't have the gift of mercy. Our church has a tutoring program and a Good News Club that we do at Orchard Knob now. So we're reaching out to children who are less fortunate with the gospel. As I said, Mercy Ministry is totally out of my comfort zone, but we're sharing the love of Christ with those who need Him. Micah 6:8 is a mandate. It's not a suggestion. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love kindness or mercy and to walk humbly with your God. So the question is not, who is my neighbor? The question is, are you a neighbor? Am I a neighbor? Okay, the next one is wife. This legacy is intimacy, and not all women are called to be wives. Marriage was the first human relationship that was established, and God uses marital language to proclaim His covenant love for His people. Hosea 2:19-20 says, "And I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice, in steadfast love and mercy. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord." So we're in a relationship to the Lord that's more intimate than any relationship that we can have with any human being. He is our bridegroom, and we, the church, are His bride. He is the head of us, as I mentioned this morning, and we are His helper, His easer. He loves us, and we respond to that love by loving Him and submitting to His will in obedience. And the wedding feast is really a preparation of the feast that we're going to have in heaven. In Ruth, Naomi tells Ruth what to do when she realizes that Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. Ruth has been trained in the ways of the covenant, and when we look at Ruth 3:1-4, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with you, whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. The bride's purpose in marriage was not self-serving. If we go on into verses 5 through 10, she replied, "And all that you say I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, his heart was merry. He went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." Boaz was a covenant keeper. He was willing to assume the responsibility and redeem the land. And in verse 11, I've already mentioned, "And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of excellence." This was a covenantal courtship, and there were risks involved because there was another person that could have been the kinsman redeemer. "And now it is true," this is verse 12, "that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize one another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Bring the garment you're wearing and hold it out." So she held it out, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How do you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me. For he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.' She replied, 'Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but settle the matter today." So he was going to settle this matter with this other fellow. The covenant marriage then became celebrated in the community. So if we go on into Ruth 4, now Boaz had gone up by the gate to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, and sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city, and he said, "Sit down here." So they sat down, and then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here, and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, but if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he said, "Well, I'll redeem it." Then Boaz said, "Well, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." Then the Redeemer said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging to confirm a transaction. The one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was a matter of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. And then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought the land from the hand of Naomi, all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name among the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. This covenant marriage brought much blessing to that community because they became the great-grandparents of David and in the line of Jesus. The covenant marriage is a picture of the gospel. Boaz was Ruth's kinsman redeemer. Jesus became a man so that he could be our kinsman. Boaz was willing and able to redeem the land. And Jesus was our Redeemer who paid the redemption price of his death on a cross for our lives. Ezekiel 16:8 says, "When I passed by you again and saw you, behold, you were at the age for love, and I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. And I made my vow to you and entered into a covenant with you, declares the Lord God, and you became mine." So we are his bride, and he is our bridegroom. After my surgery and my broken engagement and all my other things, I waited from my surgery time to 7 years before Lauren and I came together in marriage. He had moved to Chattanooga to work for TVA, got involved in our ministry together at church. We were very good friends. We grew in the Lord together. And I had those promises in the hospital, and I thought this other guy was the one that was going to fulfill those promises. And I came to the place of thinking, maybe the Lord, I took those out of context. Maybe I'm supposed to be single the rest of my life. And I was willing and ready and able for that. I really was. But we began memorizing Romans 4:20 and 21. "Yet with respect to the promise of God, he did not waver in unbelief, but grew strong in faith, giving glory to God and being fully assured that what he had promised, he was able also to perform." So I said, "Okay, Lord, if you still do have marriage for me, I'm going to wait." And when Lauren proposed to me, probably 2 years later, I asked the Lord to confirm it in his word. And this is the verse that's in Lauren's ring, 1 Kings 8:20. "Now the Lord has fulfilled the promise that he made." And it's talking about Solomon and building the temple. "For I have risen in the place of David my father and sit on the throne of Israel as the Lord promised. And I have built the house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel." But the Lord was gracious to me to let me know that he was fulfilling that promise with Lauren. The covenant of marriage is wonderful when it's God that brings the two believers together in him. Do you have a relationship of love to the Lord as his bride? And if married, what kind of relationship do you have with your husband? I hope it's a great one. There's always things that you go through in marriage. They're not always perfect. But if God is in it, he can help you to deal with anything that comes along. So our next relationship is mother. And this one is the legacy of life. In Ruth 4:13 through 22, "He went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. And the women said to Naomi, 'Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For the daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him.' Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, 'A son has been born to Naomi,' and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron, Hezron fathered Ram, Ram fathered Amminadab, Amminadab fathered Nahshon, Nahshon fathered Salmon, Salmon fathered Boaz, Boaz fathered Obed, Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David." I'm going to make an aside here that I don't have in my notes, but I just happened to think about this. When I went to leadership training the second year, Jack Scott, who was an RTS professor that I think helped start RTS in Jackson, was our teacher. And all he talked about that whole time was that we needed to see Jesus on every page of the Old Testament. And I'd never been taught that either. I knew that there were pictures of Jesus and so on. But he said, even in these genealogical lines, we need to see that. And we see it in here. It's beautiful. So Ruth became a mother to Obed, who was the father of Jesse and the father of David. She was the Moabite in the line of Jesus. And even before she became a mother, she was a life giver. And again, not all women are mothers. Not all women can give birth. I wasn't able to give birth. But all women, whether single, married with no children, or married with children, can be spiritual mothers. Naomi had the pain of losing her sons, and she became bitter. And there are a lot of women that are bitter over infertility problems. When Adam named Eve, her name means life giver. And another word for life giver is mother. But he gave her that name before she'd ever given birth. So we can be life givers or spiritual mothers. I was telling the girls at lunch, I was going to tell this story. The Lord gave me the desire to be a spiritual mother when I was single leading Bible studies at the high school with Campus Crusade for Christ. There's still one of those girls that was in my study who's at my church now. She's been there she's got 2 grown daughters herself, and she's going to help us with this event next week that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. We're still very close. And after the mission trip where I met Dirk, we had a new singles Sunday school teacher. When I came back from Europe, he had taken the singles out from the college and career, and he was a Navigator staff fellow. So he and his wife discipled me, and then when Lauren moved to Chattanooga, he got in our ministry, and so we were together in this Navigator Sunday school class. We met with him doing Bible studies in the evening, doing evangelism on the weekend. I mean, we were scripture memory, how to give our testimonies. We had apartment ministries where I led an apartment of girls and discipled girls that were living with me. We had 3 different training programs. 2 were here in Chattanooga that I was involved with, and 1 was in Knoxville, where I was a leader that summer. And that's where I learned this verse, Hebrews 12:11. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful but sorrowful, yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it leads the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Ellen, that was in the picture with me, and I were up there at UT. And that was a hard summer because we are not early risers. And she and I had to get up and go fix lunches for everybody, the guys and the girls that were going out either to class or to their jobs that day. We would go down there at 5:30 in the morning and fix all these sandwiches, and then we'd come back up and go back to sleep for a little bit before we had to go do what we were doing. So it was hard on us. And we used that verse. We talked about it a lot. Lauren and I led discipleship studies after we were married with some singles at church, and we had 2 couples that wanted to do this Navigator 2.7 with us. And then we began having kids. So a Navigator 2.7 program is a 2-year commitment usually. It took us 3 years to do the 2-year because we were having these kids in the midst of it. I became involved in women's ministry Bible studies at church after I'd stopped working. And I tried to reach out to the younger women in my groups. And one of them became very close to me. She and her husband, who's also an engineer like my husband, became very good friends. They had this cutest little redheaded girl. They went to Guatemala and adopted their son. And shortly after his adoption, they were sent to Pittsburgh to work. And so that was hard for me to have them go so far away. But his family was in Athens, so they would come back periodically to visit us. We even visited them in Pennsylvania. They moved to Columbia, South Carolina a few years ago. That's on the way to my daughters. So we've stopped and spent the night with them there. They visited us many times. We talk on the phone, we text, we email. It's just wonderful. So now they've moved to Memphis, and we haven't been that direction yet. So the next time we go, we'll definitely stop and see them. But they're at a PCA church there. And just recently, the youth pastor's wife came up to Emily and said, "Would you mentor me? Would you spiritual mother me?" I think that just thrills me, that the people that have been under me are reaching out to others. We've been to the PCA Women's Conference together. She and her husband, and Lauren and I, went to the Discipleship Conference with Chuck Colson several years ago. It's great when you have relationships and they move away. The verse I quoted out of Isaiah this morning, one of the other girls that I got to know has moved away. You know, she sent me an email back that I was checking in between. When I began attending this leadership training in Atlanta that I've mentioned, in 2001, I began seeing what a Titus II ministry could look like. I'd had all my discipleship training through Campus Crusade and Navigators. I loved that passing it on. But now I was learning it from a covenantal perspective, and my passion became, let me teach these younger women what it is to be a kingdom daughter, living covenantally, being connected to other women in our church and in our presbytery. I think I mentioned that I wanted them to understand about covenant children. So we started this Titus II ministry. I prayed for 7 years to get that ministry off the ground. It's been going on for 4 years now. And so all these groups have been meeting, and it's wonderful. My group likes to meet once a month for dinner. We meet at church because we get childcare in the mornings, but they like to meet once a month for dinner, so we meet. Their husbands take care of their children when we go to dinner. About 5 years ago, at our church, being UTC's my alma mater, and I taught there, and so I have a love for those students. The house ministry asked for some of us older folks to come and do a core group. And I thought this was going to be a big, deep discussion, Bible study. And so they gave me a core group, and they were mostly sophomores. And there were a couple of those girls that I didn't think were even Christians. You wouldn't believe all that they'd come in and talk about. I couldn't believe it. My eyes were opened a lot. But after that year, they'd kind of dwindled down, and they gave me 3 more girls. And so out of those 3 other girls, plus one that I had from originally, I now have 3. They have all graduated. I've had the privilege of watching them go through dating, engagement, and marriage, these 3 girls. They still live in Chattanooga, and they still want to meet with me. It just blows me away. I love them so much. One I mentioned this morning about the New City Eastlake, she was leaning toward Christian feminism. The pastor over there was even teaching and preaching on roles of women in the church and roles of women in the home. She would not go in the Sunday worship service. She didn't want to hear it. She wanted to stay single because she didn't want to go into a submission role, and I didn't get into all that with wives, but she didn't want some of these things. She had been to the Dominican Republic the summer before with YWAM. She thought she was graduating that year. She thought she was going to go back with them that following summer. Well, it turned out that their program fell through, so she didn't have a job. She was majoring in in special ed with a minor in Spanish, and she had, all the jobs had been taken in the school system. But the lady at her church at New City Eastlake that was in charge of the tutoring program got married and moved away, and they hired Becky to be in charge of that program. So she's been doing that now for 3 years. But that summer, before I thought she was going to the Dominican, I thought, I've got to teach her this Christian feminism is wrong. She needs to learn biblical womanhood. So I went through this book with her and our group that summer. Now, she didn't like it at first. Last year, Susan Hunt asked me if I'd go with her down to the Dominican Republic on a trip. The whole time I prayed about it, I thought, Becky's the one that loves the Dominican Republic people. She's the one that speaks the Spanish. She's the one that needs to go. So the Lord worked it out for her to go with me. And she stood up in front of 1,000 women and gave her testimony about our Titus II relationship. I stood up there beside her, and then I got to say just a few words she translated. But that was a thrill for me to be able to take her with me on a trip like that. And we were just very, very close. She was dating a guy when we went. This was January last year. They got engaged shortly after they got back. They got married in August. And right before her wedding, she sent me a text, and she called me Miss Sandy. Miss Sandy, all that you've taught me is going to be a blessing to Anthony and me. I mean, when you hear things like that from your spiritual daughters, it just thrills you to death. Last spring, I was at Covenant at the board meeting. We had to go an extra day, so they had us have dinner with students. We always have dinner with the faculty and staff, but since we had an extra day, they had us meet with students, which I loved. And so they assigned us which table to sit in. So one of the other WIC advisors was at one end of the table, I was at the other. There were 4 at each end. So we were supposed to do the questioning to them, how do you like Covenant and all these things? But they started asking questions to me. And the one across the table from me was asking me what I like to do and everything. I said, well, I've had this Titus II passion. And I said, about 2 months before the board meeting, I began praying that we could start something up at Covenant. She looked across the table at me. She said, I've been praying for something like that. And I said, really? So I met with her for about 3 or 4 times before the end of the school year, and she went home for the summer. Now, one of the other girls was sitting kind of in the middle, so she was hearing both ends of the conversation, but somehow she didn't hear that Titus II part. And I got their all email addresses. I sent them all an email. I said, I was glad to have dinner with you. And when it got closer to graduation, I sent them an email, and I said, I hope y'all have a great summer, and pray about having a Titus II ministry start this next fall. So another Emily at Covenant, Emily emailed me back, and she said, I don't think I was in that conversation about Titus II. She said, could we meet together? And so we met at graduation again. She said, I'm going to be working here this summer in an internship. She said, can we meet over at Needlows before I go to work next week? So we go to Needlows at 7 in the morning, and she looks at me and she says, would you consider being my mentor this summer? I said, are you kidding? She and I are just like this now. It's unbelievable. I love these girls almost like my own daughter. It's amazing to me that I can have that kind of love for them. So Emily, we did the Legacy of Study this summer, just the two of us at Need Loves every week. And so she got a group of her friends together. We met in the fall, and we just did a lot of different topics. And so then this semester they wanted to do this Becoming a Woman of Excellence. But, you know, it's just, it's the neatest thing to be involved in some of their lives. And her thing was, they use that hanging out term. She says, I just love hanging out with you. I mean, who would think that a college kid would want to hang out with a gray-haired lady like me, you know? But I love hanging out with her. I love hanging out with her so much. She and I are going to the Gospel Coalition Women's Conference together in June down in Orlando. And I'm just thrilled about that. And she has just gotten a job with the company that she did the internship with last summer, so she's going to stay in Chattanooga. She did start coming to First Pres. I didn't push her. I promise I didn't. She was at another PCA church, but she's started coming. She's gotten involved with college, other things at the church. If y'all come next week to the Karen Hodge event, she's going to give her testimony. So I love these girls. Are you a spiritual mother to someone? Do you have a Timothy or a Timothette in your life? Are you investing in someone? If so, thank God for her, because I've had the blessing. And if not, ask God to provide a spiritual daughter for you, because I promise you the reward will be great. Even if you drive from Hickson at 6:15 in the morning to go up to Covenant College at 7 o'clock to meet with them. Or I've been at UTC where I've met from 9 till 11 at night or 7 o'clock in the morning, depending on their schedules. You have to do what they do. But it's such a blessing. I cannot tell y'all how much of a blessing it is. Okay, we're almost done with this. Pilgrim. The pilgrim relationship is the legacy of faithfulness. A settler takes up residence and a pilgrim is on a sacred journey. A settler hopes in circumstances and a pilgrim hopes in Jesus. Pilgrims are forward-looking. When God changed our name to daughter, that sacred journey began. She flourishes more at the end than at the beginning. And I love this because of my gray hair. Psalm 71, 17 and 18. O God, from my youth you have taught me, and I still proclaim your wondrous deeds. So even to old age and gray hairs, O God, do not forsake me until I proclaim your might to another generation, your power to all those who come. Psalm 92, 12 to 15. The righteous flourish like the palm tree and grow like the cedar in Lebanon. They are planted in the house of the Lord. They flourish in the courts of our God. They still bear fruit in old age. They are ever full of sap and green, and they declare, the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him. They bear fruit in old age. A pilgrim's heart is a praising heart. And Ruth and Naomi show that pilgrim spirit as they traveled where the Lord led them back to Bethlehem. In Ruth 1, 6 through 7, and then in 4, 14 and 15. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. They went to Moab. They came back to Bethlehem. I'm shortening this because of the time. They came back to the land of Judah. And then Naomi, the women said to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Naomi had gone out full, but she came back to Bethlehem empty and bitter. And her emptiness was made full again when Obed was born. And his hesed love was seen by the kinsman redeemer, Boaz. Our emptiness was changed by a child born as our kinsman redeemer, who gives us grace so that we too can bear fruit in old age. Now, I'm going to tell you a few pilgrims in my life. The first is Carolyn Lonis. Carolyn gave of herself to our church at First Pres, to our community. She loved working. She went over to New City East Lake. She loved working with Hispanics and other people in the community. In our presbytery, I've told you about her Presbyterian connections. She was a WASC in the denomination, and she worked in the world, going with World Harvest Mission to London back and forth. She was a kingdom daughter who was covenantally connected to people in all these areas. She was my personal friend that is a pilgrim. In our denomination, we've had several who stand out to me as pilgrim. and Georgia Settle was the first women's ministry director. Her husband, Paul, helped found the PCA, and he wrote this book for the 25th anniversary. To God, all praise and glory. So, Carolyn and Georgia have gone on to be with the Lord, but they were pilgrims passing through this world. They were not settlers. Susan Hunt came after Georgia as our coordinator and was the author of all these books I've mentioned. I've got more up here. She's even written some children's books with her son and some teen books as well. Jane Petit just retired as our women's ministry coordinator at the end of February. I love that woman. She has been an encouragement and a leader to me. And at leadership training a few weeks ago, Emily and I saw her hand the baton to Karen Hodge. Karen was a WIC trainer, is a pastor's wife, has 2 college-age children, and she's speaking next Friday at our church. And we've invited our presbytery and the Nashville Presbytery to come to hear her and get to know her. We are part of a much bigger family in our denomination, and our connection covenantally is what we're known for. These are just a few of the women that have passed through. They're not the 2 that have gone on to be with the Lord, but are we pilgrims passing through this world, knowing that we're going to be in heaven with our King forever? Are you a pilgrim or are you a settler? Now I want to go back to the covenant thread. I hope I've got about 10 more minutes. Is that okay? There. I said we'd talk about the global and the local this afternoon. And I've already talked really about the global because I told you my story about Dirk. In Acts 1:8 it says, "But you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria to the end of the earth." So we're to be his witnesses all around the world. Our denomination has MTW, and I met a couple of people that have been involved with MTW as missionaries today. Our church supports 5 partnerships, and we're going to be considering another one when we go to Australia next week. Lauren and I have been on out of the 5 partnerships, we've been to 4 of them, and we're going to go next week to Australia to see if our church wants to support church planters there. We have a partnership with you all in Belarus. Lauren and I have been there twice. I love that place. The choirs are now going. Lookout Mountain, your choir and our choir are going together and having great trips there. I've already mentioned World Harvest Mission. We have the partnership there. We have a German partnership, and we have a Monterrey, Mexico partnership. And I had the privilege of leading 2 groups down there to do retreats for the women there a few years ago. So how are you connecting globally? Then the covenant is also local. I entered into a covenant relationship with my body of believers. Just yesterday morning, I got on Facebook from my former pastor, Dr. Mike Milton. He showed us the importance of the local church. Not too long ago, my wife and I caught a live streaming event from the Reagan Lectures at the Center for Vision and Values at Grove City College. I was particularly interested in the lectures that night because the main speaker was the Reverend John Boyles, the pastor to President Reagan during his 2 terms. I learned that night that President and Mrs. Reagan transferred their membership from Bel Air Presbyterian in Hollywood to National Presbyterian Church in Washington, D.C. He did this because of his lifelong conviction instilled into his soul by God through his mother, Nellie, to be connected and involved in the fellowship of local believers. It would have been very easy for the President of the United States to say, "My membership is back in Hollywood. Once I'm finished with this gig here, I'll just return to my home church." Yet that's not the testimony we heard from Reverend John Boyles. President and Mrs. Reagan became active members until he became convinced that he was a nuisance and a distraction from the worship of Jesus. So the pastor and other pastors would then go to the White House to conduct worship there. But still, he believed in the fellowship of the local assembly of believers, and that brought him great joy. On his first Christmas address to the nation, he wanted to speak of the divinity of Jesus Christ and to be able to bring that message, especially to people behind the Iron Curtain who would be listening through the Voice of America. In fact, he did so that night. The next day, the Washington Post printed his Christmas address, but apparently and intentionally left out the opening paragraphs. Those were the paragraphs where he spoke of Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, who miraculously had come into the world. Reverend Boyles was very upset that the Washington Post expunged what he felt was the president's obvious intent to get the message of the gospel out to the world. So he wrote a letter to the Washington Post, and his letter was published in the church newsletter. He was surprised when he received a handwritten letter from the President of the United States, one of his parishioners, thanking him for standing up for him. He had learned about what Reverend Boyles had done because the President of the United States not only read the great newspapers of the cities and our cities and the cities of the world, he took time each week to read his own home church's newsletter. When he wrote his pastor, he thanked him for his stand, and he said words like this: "Pastor, I hope I'll never let you down or the church. I hope I never bring any embarrassment to you, the church, or our Savior as I do this job." Many people knew Ronald Reagan characterized as joyful. Mike's talk was about being joyful. When he finished his term as president in the People's House, he returned to his home in Bel Air, California, and you know what happened? He transferred his membership back to his home church. He believed in that local assembly of believers, and he would be a minister from that assembly that would conduct the funeral service of the 40th President of the United States of America. He loved the fellowship with his local church. How important is the fellowship of other believers to you? We belong to a covenant community in our local church. I guess I missed that. That's the global. Okay. We have our Tennessee Valley Presbytery, and then we have our Mid-America region. The Tennessee Valley Presbytery, our Preswick, has not had a meeting in about a year. So our church is having Karen Hodge next week, and I noticed her poster out there in the foyer. I hope that some of you will come. Karen is coming for the Covenant College board meeting, so she told me that she would stay and do a talk that night for us. She couldn't come any other time in the spring. So I hope we're going to have from many churches represented, Knoxville, Sevierville, Nashville. They're bringing some people. And so I hope that some of you all will come. And if you want to, you can give me your $10 or $5 if you're a student today, and I'll turn that in because we've got to know the number of food on Monday. On September 6th, we're hosting Laura Story. I hope y'all know who she is. Grammy Award-winning musician. She's been at the PCA Women's Conference a few years ago, and then she also was at General Assembly this last summer. So she's going to come on a Saturday, September 6th, and do a program for us, intertwining her testimony in with her music. It will be wonderful. The Mid-America region, of which I am now the regional advisor, is 13 presbyteries, and it goes Tennessee Valley, Nashville Presbytery, and Tennessee. The two ends are not in our region. And 11 other presbyteries in Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, Michigan, Missouri, South Dakota, and North Dakota. It's a huge area. At LT, we meet together and get to know ladies from these other presbyteries. Emily, Diane, Boo, and Eva, and Danielle have all been to it. Every year we're assigned an agency to pray for. And this year, our agency is the PCA Foundation with Randy Stair as its president. So I want you to pray for Randy Stair as he leads this foundation. But I also want you to pray for them personally. Now remember, Kathy was one that came here and did the hospitality. I was here for it. But their son-in-law, Ryan, has cancer, and he's undergoing treatment right now. They have 3 small children, so they would really appreciate your prayers for him. At the denominational level, we have conferences, leadership training, discipleship, mercy, children's missions. We have Covenant College, Covenant Seminary. General Assembly will be here next year. Diane is going to be heading up the women and children. Hope that you'll participate in that. The AC Committee is in charge of GA. MNA is our home mission board. Ridgehaven is our camp in North Carolina. RUF or RUM, Reform University Ministries, is our ministry to the college students. RBI is Retirement Benefits, Inc., helps retired pastors and their families. And the PCA Love Gift is given by women every year to a different agency. And this year, it just happens to be CENP, the Women's Ministry, Titus II Ministry.